The movie begins by presenting a loving couple composed of Spencer, an astronaut, and Jillian, a primary school teacher. They are enjoying their last moments together as Spencer is about to depart on a new space mission. After the rocket's launch, Jillian goes to work, but her day is interrupted by a call from Spencer from Earth's orbit. He finds no better moment than now to speak to her in a provocative manner. Even though a colleague reminds her that 300 NASA employees are listening, so Spencer merely asks her to smile at the sky so he can feel her presence. Shortly after, while receiving a visit from his sister Nan, Jillian sees on television a news report about Spencer and the flight captain Shrek. At that very second, an agent named Sherman appears at her door, asking her to accompany him, while assuring her that her husband has not died at the NASA station. Jillian embraces Natalie's wife, who believes that her husband has perished. Later, they receive news that the men are alive, but that, while performing repairs on a satellite, they were injured by an explosion. They managed to return to the spacecraft, and NASA did everything possible to bring them back. Fortunately, they succeeded, and the ship landed without complications, reassuring the wives in the infirmary that Spencer had not sustained any serious injuries. However, Shrek was not as lucky, and being an older man, his heart was severely affected. Later, Spencer regains consciousness, and the first thing he does is call Jillian, who immediately kisses him. Then the astronaut asks about his companion, something his wife does not know how to answer, while at the same time Shrek awakens, desperately calling Spencer and asking him what they saw in space. Suddenly, Shrek begins to suffer a heart attack, and the doctors rush to save him. Days later, once both men have fully recovered, their wives wonder what happened in space, but neither of the men is willing to discuss it. Shrek confesses to his wife that he wants to resign from NASA because he has received an offer to become an executive at an aerospace company in New York, where he will earn even more money. Moreover, his status as a national hero will bring him additional benefits, as the country now admires him for having survived the explosion. Jillian is dubious about moving to New York, but eventually accepts due to her husband's enthusiasm. Consequently, the woman says goodbye to the school children, and one of them jokingly mentions that her husband encountered someone in space at night. Jillian and Spencer then prepare a farewell party with all their friends. The event goes wonderfully, except for Shrek, who is treating his wife rudely. Shrek goes in search of Spencer, his eyes and mouth filling with blood. Although Jillian tries to help him, the man collapses onto a table, dying from a heart attack and leaving everyone in shock. Following this, NASA organizes a press conference to pay tribute to Shrek and to assure that Spencer is not at risk of suffering the same fate, as he is completely healthy. At the astronaut's funeral, Natalie tells Jillian that her husband used to speak every night via radio with a mysterious species, even claiming that one of them hides inside him. Later, when Spencer returns with the others, Jillian sees Sherman asking her husband to undergo some tests, just in case. Suddenly, a little girl starts screaming in the bathroom. When the guests arrive, they are confronted with a terrible scene. Natalie is electrocuting herself in the bathtub with a radio. That was enough for Jillian and Spencer to decide to move to New York once and for all. At a gala party organized by her husband, he makes new friends. Jillian, a primary school teacher, has trouble fitting in with these people, although a woman named Shelley approaches her to keep her company in the conversation. Shelley praises Jillian's honest laugh, remarking that she hadn't heard such a laugh in a long time, but is soon called away, not without promising Jillian that they will be friends in the future. When Spencer returns, he lovingly checks her pulse discreetly, and Jillian suspects it might be due to her accident in space. In response, Spencer takes her to a distant corridor, where he begins to touch her provocatively, while explaining that during the journey, there were 2 minutes after the explosion in which he lost communication with NASA. 2 minutes filled with nothing but darkness and silence. The only thing that comforted him in those moments was thinking of Jillian, with whom he made love in that corridor, and they continue their passionate encounter at home. Although Spencer goes too far with his aggressiveness, so much so that she ends up completely undressed hours later, Jillian wakes up still feeling some pain. She then finds Spencer listening to a radio frequency, which he quickly changes as soon as he sees her. The man apologizes for his earlier rudeness, claiming he had drunk too much at the party. The next day, Jillian tries to find the frequency her husband was listening to, but the radio operates normally. Later at work, she becomes overwhelmed by the noise of the children, who had never bothered her so much before, and decides to call her sister to discuss her state of mind. Nan remarks that Jillian is starting to behave like she did when their parents died and recommends that she seek psychological help. Although Jillian initially thinks that her low mood is due to a pregnancy, as she also feels very ill, her suspicions are confirmed when a pregnancy test comes back positive. She had intended to tell her husband, but is compelled to attend a dinner with Shelley and her millionaire husband Jackson, who continuously talks about rockets with Spencer. Finally, when they are alone, Jillian shares the news with him, greatly delighting Spencer. Later in the hospital, they discover that they are expecting not just one baby, but a pair of twins. In a private conversation with the doctor, Jillian confesses something that was not in her history. When her parents died, she began to imagine those around her dying in horrific ways, including herself, and she now fears that her pregnancy might resurrect those traumas. The doctor offers her support along with a telephone number for mothers expecting twins during the night. Jillian then has a nightmare about Natalie's death, in which she sees herself electrocuting in the bathtub. When she wakes up terrified, Spencer helps calm her by giving her a bath and reminding her that her children will grow up strong and healthy one day. Another day, Jillian attends a meeting of mothers expecting twins, where everyone complains that their husbands do not understand the changes their bodies are going through. However, Jillian does not participate because Spencer is completely different. Returning home, she dances to the sound of the radio until her husband appears unexpectedly, treating her with the usual affection while buying toys for their future children at a store. In the store, Jillian encounters Sherman, who had been fired by NASA for insisting on examining Spencer thoroughly, and people warn her about her husband, saying that something is wrong with him based on his pre- and post-accident medical results. Although Jillian tries to dismiss him as crazy, Sherman reveals that when Natalie took her own life, she was 3 weeks pregnant. Continuing his argument, he asserts that what happened in space was not a simple explosion. Astronauts like Spencer and Streck were trained for such events, yet they panicked during those 2 minutes of darkness. As evidence, Sherman hands her an audio tape recorded by Spencer's suit during the mission. Upon listening to the tape, Jillian is so frightened by the sounds of a mysterious creature and the screams of the astronauts that she decides to destroy the evidence completely. When Jillian asks again about the 2 minutes of the accident, Spencer becomes enraged, exclaiming that it is time to move on. However, as Sherman had said, Spencer calls him to obtain more information and discovers that Natalie's autopsy revealed twins inside her. This revelation causes Jillian to panic, as she remembers how Spencer had once forced her to have relations in order to get her pregnant. Consequently, she agrees to meet with Sherman because he urgently has something to show her. However, Spencer beats her to it by insisting that everyone undergo medical tests. Unable to refuse him, Sherman leaves his briefcase behind for Jillian to retrieve. But once again, Spencer is faster. Jillian blames her confidant, Nan, although Nan swears she never mentioned anything about Sherman to Spencer. It seemed that Jillian would never uncover the truth until one day at school she finds a key in her locker, courtesy of Spencer, in case something happened. When she goes to the storage room and uses the key to open a door, Jillian finds a VHS tape. Suddenly, the lights go out. After barely escaping the place, Jillian plays the tape at home and sees Sherman telling her that if she is watching the video, it is probably because she is dead, although he had always ensured there was a backup archive. The agent then explains that in the recording of the space incident, there is a third voice coming from an alien that lured the astronauts and took over Spencer's body during those infernal 2 minutes. The video ends with Sherman assuring that if anyone wants a pair of twins to pilot a spacecraft, Spencer's company is the one to choose. When Spencer appears, Jillian pretends to be fine so as not to arouse suspicion while they sleep together. That night, she experiences visions of the attack in space when the astronauts were tormented by an inexplicable sound. Later, Jillian concludes that she will abort her children to finally end her nightmare. Shelley gives her some special pills. However, Jillian is unable to go through with killing her twins, and as soon as Spencer finds her with the pills, he furiously slaps her while trying to push her away. The woman falls down the stairs. When she awakens in the hospital, Spencer triumphantly declares that their twins survived the fall and threatens Jillian, warning her to remain silent about what she nearly did to them. Just as his sister arrives, Jillian tries to warn her sister that something terrible is growing inside her, but she does not know how to explain it. One night, Jillian has a nightmare in which Spencer is fondling Sherman's private parts until Nan appears to confront him. In a matter of seconds, Spencer strikes Nan so forcefully against her body that she falls dead, blood streaming from her eyes and mouth. Terrified, Jillian leaves the hospital to get to her apartment as quickly as possible, for she saw her sister die there. However, just a few meters from her destination, Spencer finds her thanks to the connection he has with the twins. Quickly, Jillian enters the apartment and locks all the doors. Then she goes to the room from her nightmare, where fortunately she does not find her dead sister. It was only a vision. When Spencer manages to enter, he finds Jillian waiting for him with some wires in her hands and the floor soaked with water. She warns him that if he comes any closer, she won't hesitate to electrocute him. As Jillian confronts him, she notices blood on his hands, confirming that her nightmare was not entirely false. She then accuses him of being the murderer of both her sister and her husband, for the real Spencer no longer exists. In other words, the alien within him begins to use its powers to attract the twins and thereby get closer to her. But then water starts dripping from the upper floor, since she had also turned on the faucets there. As soon as the water touches Spencer, Jillian climbs onto a chair and connects the wires to electrocute him. However, this action only frees the alien within him, a mass of tentacles that immediately takes over Jillian's body in order to raise its own children. Years later, we see that the twins appear as normal children who live with their mother and their stepfather, a NASA pilot, on their first day of school. Julian fantasizes about his future as a pilot, just like his father, a title he has earned, while her new husband is on his way to the school. The twins listen to a strange radio frequency as they prepare for their own space mission.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.